story began on that fateful night when the Alpha King was supposed to choose my sister. But instead, he walked to me and growled, "She is mine." Now that story continues. I, the wolfless Omega, found the strength of a storm within me. He, the cursed king, found in me the hope for healing. Every night, my touch soothed the darkness on his skin, and we believed we had conquered the ancient evil, that we had found a fragile peace. But we were wrong. The curse wasn't dying, it was only lying in wait. And tonight, it will strike back, threatening to consume not only him, but me as well, forever. The peace we had fought for was a quiet, living thing. It resided in the steady beat of Merrick's heart against my back as we slept, in the way the morning light no longer seemed to mock the shadows in our keep, but instead filled them with a soft, gentle glow. 2 years. 2 years since the storm inside me had awakened to answer the storm in him. 2 years of a slow, meticulous healing that was as much a part of our daily life as the meals we shared and the silent conversations we held with a single glance across the great hall. The winter storm pack, once a sea of hostile faces, was now my family, their loyalty a fierce and protective shield around us. Winterfang was home. Tonight, the fire in our chambers crackled, its flames casting dancing patterns of gold and crimson on the stone walls. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song through the high mountain passes, a reminder of the wild world we ruled. But in here, there was only warmth and stillness. I sat on a fur rug before the hearth, my back resting against Merrick's legs as he sat in his heavy oak chair. His hand was in my hair, his fingers idly tracing the patterns of my braids, his touch a familiar comfort. We had just finished our evening meal, and the comfortable silence that settled between us was a testament to how far we had come. "It is almost gone," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the fire, but my senses turned inward toward him. I could feel the blight on his soul, the last vestiges of the ancient curse. It was no longer an angry, writhing mass of darkness, but a faint, faded bruise, a ghost of the agony that had defined his life. "Because of you," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration that I felt through my whole body. He leaned forward, his other hand coming to rest on my shoulder, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin above my collarbone. "You are a quiet, Lysandra, a stillness to the rage I carried for so long." I turned, craning my neck to look up at him. The firelight carved his face into stark plains and deep shadows, highlighting the rugged beauty I had once found so terrifying. His glacial eyes, no longer chips of ice, held the warm, possessive glow of a wolf for his mate. I reached up and laid my hand against his cheek, my thumb brushing over the jagged scar that cut through his eyebrow. "And you are the fire that showed me I was not made of ash." He leaned into my touch, a rare, unguarded softness in his expression. It was in these moments, in the quiet of our chambers, that the fearsome Alpha King vanished, and I was left with just Merrick, my Merrick, the man whose broken pieces had fit so perfectly against my own. "It is time," he said softly, his gaze dropping to my other hand, the one that rested on my lap. He was asking for the healing. It had become our nightly ritual, a final, intimate act before sleep claimed us, a gentle reinforcement of our bond and a steady chipping away at the ancient poison in his bloodline. I nodded and shifted, turning to face him fully. I knelt before his chair, the furs soft beneath my knees. He watched me, his expression solemn, trusting. He unlaced the collar of his tunic, his practiced fingers pulling the leather aside to expose the column of his throat. The mark of the curse was there, a faint web-like pattern of pale lavender against his skin, no longer the angry, bruised purple it had once been. It was a dying thing. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I closed my eyes and called to the storm within, the wild, blue-white power that was my birthright. It answered instantly, a familiar hum beneath my skin, a cool rush of energy that tasted of ozone and moonlight. I lifted my hand, my palm glowing with a soft, ethereal light, and pressed it gently against the faded mark on his neck. For a moment, everything was as it should be. I felt the connection snap into place, my power flowing from me into him, a soothing, cleansing tide against the shores of his old wound. I felt his own wolf spirit rise to meet mine, a silent greeting, a murmur of gratitude. He let out a soft sigh, his head tilting back, his body relaxing into the ritual. Then, It happened. Without warning, the curse fought back. It was not a gradual resistance. It was a sudden, violent eruption. The faded lavender mark flared with a malevolent, virulent black light, the color of a starless, suffocating night. A scream, silent and utterly soul-shattering, tore through the bond between us. It was a sound of pure hatred, of ancient, undying malice. The dormant poison, which we had believed so close to eradication, awakened with the fury of a cornered viper. A wave of black energy, icy and sharp as shattered glass, blasted out from the mark. It slammed into me, not as a physical blow, but as an attack on my spirit. It felt like 1,000 frozen needles piercing my soul, a violation so profound it stole the air from my lungs. The blue light of my own power sputtered and died, overwhelmed by the sheer, unexpected violence of the assault. I was thrown backward, a strangled cry torn from my throat. I landed hard on the stone floor several feet away, my head striking the leg of a heavy wooden table. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain, then dissolved into a swirling gray fog. The last thing I heard was Merrick's voice, roaring my name in a sound that was no longer human, a sound of pure, unrestrained terror and rage. When consciousness returned, it was in fragmented shards. I was lying on our bed, the soft furs a stark contrast to the throbbing agony in my head. A cool, damp cloth was being pressed to my temple. I blinked, and Varya's scarred, worried face swam into focus above me. Her usual grim expression was replaced by one of open fear. "Luna," she whispered, her voice rough with concern. "Lysandra, can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my throat was raw. I managed a weak nod. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my head spinning. The fire was burning low, and the room was filled with a thick, tense silence. "Marek," I croaked, my eyes scanning the room. "Where is he?" Varya's gaze flickered toward the far corner of the room, the one deepest in shadow, away from the firelight. I followed her look and my heart seized. He was there, pressed into the corner as if trying to force himself through the very stone of the walls. He was not the Alpha King. He was a caged animal. His hands were braced against the wall, his head hung low, his powerful shoulders trembling with the force of his suppressed fury. The scent rolling off him was a toxic storm of self-loathing, guilt, and a terrifying bone-deep fear. "Merrick," I whispered again, my voice stronger this time. I tried to swing my legs off the bed, but a wave of dizziness washed over me, and a sharp, burning pain in my right arm made me gasp. I looked down, from my wrist to my elbow, a series of thin, black lines snaked across my skin. Like frozen lightning or the veins of a dying leaf, they were cold to the touch. A deathly, unnatural chill that seemed to suck the warmth from my very bones. It was the mark of his curse. It had branded me. Seeing it, Merrick let out a choked, guttural sound, a noise of such profound agony it felt like a blade twisting in my own gut. "Get away from her," he snarled at Varya, his voice a broken, ragged thing. "All of you, get out!" Jorand, who had been standing guard by the door, his face a grim mask of shock, stepped forward. "Alpha, you are not out!" Merrick roared, slamming his fist against the stone wall. The sound cracked like a whip, and a web of fractures appeared in the solid rock around his knuckles. The sheer, uncontrolled violence in the act silenced everyone. Varya and Jorand exchanged a look of fear, not for themselves, but for their king. They bowed their heads and retreated, closing the heavy oak doors softly behind them, leaving us alone in the suffocating silence. I finally managed to get to my feet, my legs unsteady. I swayed, using the bedpost for support. "Merrick, talk to me," I pleaded, taking a tentative step toward him. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice raw. He still wouldn't look at me. "Don't come near me." "It wasn't your fault," I said, my own voice trembling. "The curse. It did something. It was hiding." "I hurt you," he ground out, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "I promised you were safe with me. I promised. And I branded you with the very filth I swore to protect you from." He finally turned his head, and the look in his eyes shattered my heart. The warmth, the love, the peace we had built. It was all gone, buried beneath an avalanche of his old demons. All I saw was the cold, haunted gaze of the Barren King, a ruler who believed himself a monster. "We will fix it," I insisted, taking another step. "Together, we just have to." "No, you." He cut me off, his voice flat and final. He pushed himself off the wall and walked not toward me, but to the far side of the room, putting as much distance between us as possible. He grabbed a heavy fur cloak from a hook and swung it around his shoulders, his movements stiff and deliberate. He was encasing himself in armor again, shutting me out. "There is no we in this. The healing is over. You will not touch me again. I will not let you risk yourself for my sake. Not ever again." His words were colder than the wind outside, colder than the black mark on my arm. They were a dismissal, a severing. He was choosing to suffer alone rather than risk hurting me further. He was locking himself back in the prison of his curse and throwing away the key. He stalked toward the door, his face a mask of stone. "Where are you going?" I cried out, panic rising in my throat. He paused with his hand on the iron latch, his back to me. "To the forge. The fire is the only thing that burns this feeling out." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a heavy, resounding thud that echoed the finality in his voice. I was left alone in the sudden cold of the room, staring at the alien black marks on my arm, the brand of his pain, and the proof of his fear. The peace we had built over 2 years had been shattered in a single violent moment. The next days were a special kind of hell. Merrick kept his word. He did not come to our chambers. He did not speak to me. I saw him only at the evening meal in the great hall, where he sat at the head of the dais, a remote and forbidding figure of ice and stone. He would not meet my eyes. He retreated so far into himself that his power, which usually filled the keep with a sense of security, now felt like an oppressive, chilling weight. The pack felt it too. The easy laughter and camaraderie vanished, replaced by tense whispers and anxious glances. Their alpha was suffering, and the bond between their Luna and Alpha was fractured. The entire pack was off balance. I refused to accept it. Every night I went to the forge, hoping to find him, to break through the wall he had built. But he wasn't there. He had abandoned his one solace because he knew I would seek him out in it. He was actively avoiding me, cutting me out with surgical precision. The black lines on my arm did not fade. They remained, a cold and constant reminder of the night our world broke. On the 5th day, as the first snows of true winter began to fall, a sentry from the lower gate sent word of an arrival. A lone traveler, a she-wolf, requesting an audience with the Alpha King. She would not give her name, saying only that she was called by the mountain and the blood. Merrick, in his dark mood, would have normally sent such a person away, but something in the cryptic message piqued his interest. Desperate for any distraction from his own torment, he granted the audience. I stood on the balcony overlooking the main courtyard as she was escorted in. She was ancient, her gray fur so pale it was almost white against the snow. She was stooped with age, leaning heavily on a twisted staff of what looked like petrified wood. But her eyes, when she glanced up, were startlingly sharp and intelligent, the color of dark, polished amber. She carried the scent of high, lonely places, of crushed herbs, cold stone, and something else. The faint electric tang of prophecy. Merrick met her in the great hall. I stood in the shadows near the entrance, refusing to be excluded. Joran stood by my side, a silent, supportive presence. The old she-wolf walked to the center of the hall, her staff making a soft, rhythmic tapping on the flagstones. She stopped before the dais, where Merrick sat on his throne, his face an unreadable mask. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice a dry rustle, like leaves skittering over stone. "The last of the mountain seers. I have come because a vision pulled me from my solitude, a vision of a storm consuming a king, and a moon being shattered." Her amber eyes flickered to me in the shadows, and I felt the weight of her gaze, as if she could see the black marks on my arm right through the wool of my sleeve. Merrick's posture stiffened. "I have no time for riddles, old one." "This is no riddle, Alpha King," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The blight on your bloodline has awakened. It has tasted a power that rivals its own, and its master has been alerted. The root of the curse was not afarashed, only starved. Now it feeds again, and it will not stop until it has consumed you both." A low growl rumbled in Merrick's chest. "What do you know of my curse?" "I know it was woven by the Shadow Weavers," she replied. And at the name, a collective gasp went through the few elders present in the hall. It was a name from dark legends, a pack of blood mages thought to have been wiped out centuries ago. I know they did not merely poison your line. They tethered it to their master. He has been siphoning the strength of your ancestors for generations, and he intended to do the same with you. But your Luna, her power interrupted the flow. It starved him. Now he seeks to reclaim his prize by destroying the one who denies him. Everything she said resonated with a terrifying truth. It explained the sudden, violent resurgence. It wasn't random, it was a counterattack. How do we fight a ghost? Jorand asked from beside me, his voice rough. Lyra's gaze fell upon me again, then moved to Merrick. There is only one way. The magic must be cleansed at its source. You must undertake the trial of two souls. Merrick leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. What is this trial? A ritual. At the place where the curse was first cast, the sunken citadel of the Shadow Weavers. You must go there together. Your two souls, your two powers, must be woven into one. Only a perfect union, a bond of absolute trust, can overwhelm and destroy the original casting. It is a perilous journey, and the trial itself is a razor's edge. Success will cleanse your bloodline forever. Failure, she paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent hall. Failure will see your Luna's power ripped from her and used to make the sorcerer immortal, and your own life force will be the final sacrifice. The hall was utterly still. The seer had offered us a sliver of hope, wrapped in the promise of utter annihilation. I felt a surge of defiant resolve. It was a chance. It was the only way back to what we had lost. I stepped out of the shadows, the black marks on my arms seeming to burn with cold. Merrick's head snapped toward me, and for the first time in days, he truly looked at me. I saw the desperate love and the terrible fear warring in his eyes. He saw the resolve on my face, and his own expression hardened into an impenetrable wall of granite. He rose from his throne, his full, intimidating height seeming to diminish the very fires in the hearths. No, he declared, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of a king. I will not do it. I will not lead her into a sorcerer's trap and risk her soul on the word of a stranger. This is my curse. I will face it alone. His words were a dismissal of her, of the prophecy, and of me. He was shutting the only door that had opened. I met his gaze without flinching, my own power stirring within me, a cold fury at his refusal to let me share his burden. You faced it alone your entire life, Myrick, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the vast, silent hall. Look where that has led us. This trial is not your choice to make alone. Our eyes locked in a battle of wills, his fierce with a protective love so strong it was suffocating. Mine burning with the conviction that the only way forward was together, into the very heart of the darkness that threatened to tear us apart for good. The silence in the great hall was a brittle, fragile thing, stretched taut between my defiance and his decree. The pack wolves, caught in the crossfire of their alpha's pain and their Luna's rebellion, stood frozen, their gazes shifting between us. They had only ever known Merrick's word as absolute law, as unyielding as the mountain itself. To hear it challenged by me was to witness the foundations of their world tremble. Merrick's face was a thundercloud, his glacial eyes narrowed into slits of furious disbelief. The authority of the Alpha King radiated from him in palpable waves, a crushing pressure meant to bring any challenger to their knees. But I would not kneel, not this time. This is not a debate, he bit out, his voice dangerously low, each word a chip of ice. My decision is final. The seer will be given provisions and sent on her way. You will remain within these walls, where you are safe. Safe? I echoed, and a bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. I held up my right arm, pulling back the sleeve of my dress to reveal the ugly black veins of the curse's brand that snaked across my skin. They seemed to pulse with a cold, dark light in the flickering torchlight. Does this look safe to you, Merrick? Your curse has already marked me. It has already found me. Hiding me behind stone walls is like trying to hide from the winter by standing in an open field. The cold will find you regardless. A muscle clenched in his jaw, and his gaze fell upon the marks. I saw a flicker of raw, unadulterated agony in his eyes before he masked it with ice. That was his weakness, his guilt, and it was the one thing I had to break through. Old One, I said, turning my attention to the seer, Lyra, whose ancient amber eyes watched our exchange with unnerving calm. Tell me of these shadow weavers. How can we fight an enemy we know nothing about? Lysandra! Merrick's voice was a whip crack, a command to be silent. I ignored him, my focus entirely on the seer. Tell me, I repeated, my voice imbued with the quiet authority of a Luna who would not be silenced. Lyra gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of respect that was a clear defiance of the Alpha King's will. They were a clan of the deep forests, long before your pack claimed these mountains, she began, her voice a dry whisper that carried to every corner of the silent hall. They did not draw their strength from the moon goddess or the spirit of the hunt. They drew it from blood, from pain. Their magic is one of tethers and siphons. They do not seek to kill their enemies outright. They seek to drain them, to feed on their power over lifetimes, growing stronger while their victims wither. As she spoke, a horrifying clarity settled over me. Merrick's ancestors, his father, they hadn't just suffered. They had been farmed, harvested, and the curse was the instrument of that harvest. The sunken citadel is not just their old stronghold, Lyra continued, her gaze finding Merrick's again. It is the anchor point for the tether that binds your bloodline to their master. It is a wound in the world, and it is the only place the blade of your combined power can sever the cord. But the Alpha King is right in his fear. The citadel is warded. It will test your bond. It will feed on your doubts, on your guilt. It will try to turn you against one another. If your union is not perfect, if your trust is not absolute, it will shatter you. Her words hung in the air, a dire warning that only seemed to harden Merrick's resolve. He saw only the risk, the potential for my destruction. He could not see the hope. Enough, he snarled. He descended the steps of the dais, his presence a terrifying force of nature. He strode toward me, the pack wolves parting before him like reeds in a river. He stopped in front of me, looming over me, his shadow a cold blanket. You will go to our chambers. Now, we are done here. His use of R was a cruel twist of the knife, a reminder of an intimacy he had already rejected. But I did not move. I lifted my chin and met his furious gaze. No, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. We are not. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he might physically force me. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the knuckles white. A low, warning growl vibrated in his chest, the primal instinct of an alpha demanding obedience. But he was at war with himself. The king demanded submission, but the mate could not bear to cause me more pain. The conflict was a visible storm in his eyes. With a sound of pure, frustrated rage, he spun on his heel and stalked from the great hall, his long, powerful strides eating up the distance. He did not command the guards to take me. He did not command anyone to do anything. He simply left, a king fleeing a battle he could not win with force or fury. The moment he was gone, the tension in the hall broke. Murmurs erupted. Yoren let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since the confrontation began. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. Luna, no one has ever... I know, I cut him off, my own composure threatening to crack. I turned to Lyra. I need to know more. Are there any records, any histories that speak of the Shadow Weavers? The old seer nodded. The Alphas of Winterfang have always been keepers of lore, even that of their enemies. In the heart of the keep, there is a library, a place of quiet and dust. If answers are to be found within these walls, they will be there. Leaving Joran to deal with the confused pack and the unnerved elders, I followed Lyra's direction, my mind a whirlwind. I found the library in a secluded tower I had never entered before. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and dust. Scrolls were stacked in tall alcoves carved from the stone, and massive, iron-bound tomes rested on lecterns, their pages filled with the spidery script of generations of pack historians. For hours I searched, my fingers growing numb from the cold, my eyes aching from deciphering faded ink by the light of a single lantern. Most of the texts were pack lineages, records of battles, and treaties. But in a dark, forgotten corner, I found it. A small, unassuming book bound in what looked like dried, blackened leather. There was no title on the cover. A sense of profound dread washed over me as I opened it. It was a journal, the personal account of a historian from centuries ago, a wolf named Kalen, who had been tasked with documenting the war against the Shadow Weavers. His handwriting grew more erratic, more frantic with each passing page. He wrote of their horrifying magic, of warriors falling not to blades, but to a creeping, wasting sickness that drained their life force. He wrote of the sorcerer who led them, a being of immense power who could not be killed by conventional means. Then I found the passage that made my blood run cold. The tether is not just a siphon, Kalen had written, his script a desperate scrawl. It is a mirror. The curse placed upon the Droven Alpha was a twisted reflection of a flaw that already existed. The sorcerer did not create a weakness. He found one and poisoned it. The first Alpha King bore a seed of doubt in his heart, a fear that his strength was not enough to protect his people. The curse fed on that fear, turning it into a blight that has passed from father to son. Each generation, the Alpha of Winterfang is born not just with a crown, but with a seed of self-loathing, a kernel of despair that the curse nurtures until it consumes him. To break the tether is not just to fight the sorcerer. It is to conquer the doubt that has been the true prison of the Dravon line for centuries. A mirror, it fed on doubt. Merrick's guilt, his pushing me away, his insistence on facing this alone. He thought he was protecting me, but he was feeding the very curse he was trying to fight. His self-loathing was its sustenance. The journal fell from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the dusty floor. I finally understood. The trial wasn't just about combining our power. It was about healing the true wound, the one that had festered in Merrick's bloodline for generations, and he could not do it alone. Just then, a commotion from the courtyard below drew my attention. I went to the narrow library window and looked down. A warrior, one of the scouts from the Southern Patrol, was half stumbling, half carried toward the keep's entrance. His horse was lathered in sweat, and the man himself was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the fatigue of a hard ride. He was clutching something in his hand. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. I ran from the library, my footsteps echoing in the empty stone corridors. I arrived at the great hall just as Jorand was helping the scout into a chair. Merrick was there, having been summoned from wherever he had been brooding. He stood before the scout, his face grim. "Report," Merrick commanded. The scout, a young wolf named Finn, swallowed hard, his breathing ragged. "Alpha, we found their camp. The ferals who attacked the hunting lodge. It was abandoned, but they were not alone. There was evidence of dark magic everywhere, ritual markings, and this," he opened his clenched fist. He wasn't holding a weapon or a banner. He was holding a small, simple object that had no business being in a feral camp hundreds of miles to the south. It was a silver clasp, shaped like a winter rose. The breath left my body in a painful rush. The world tilted, the torchlight swimming before my eyes. I knew that clasp. I had worn it in my hair on the night of the choosing, the night Merrick had claimed me. It had been lost in the chaos as he pulled me from the glade, from my old life. I had assumed it was trampled into the mud, gone forever, but it was here, clean, polished, placed deliberately in that camp for my scout to find. It was a message, a declaration. I can touch what is yours. I can reach into your past and pluck out a memory. You are not safe. She is not safe. I am always watching. Merrick stared at the clasp, his face draining of all color. The last wall of his denial, the fortress of his guilt, crumbled into dust. This was no longer a theoretical threat, a vague prophecy from a seer. This was the enemy at our door, holding a piece of our history, a piece of me, in his unseen hand. The feral attack on the lodge hadn't been a random act of aggression. It had been a test. A way for the sorcerer to gauge my power, to see what he was up against, and a way for him to acquire a token, an object connected to me. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying cold fury. It was not a fury directed at me, but at the enemy who had dared to threaten me so intimately. The guilt was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a primal, possessive rage that was far more potent. He strode over to me in 3 long steps and took my arm, his fingers gently tracing the black lines of the brand. He looked from the mark on my skin to the silver clasp in the scout's hand, connecting the two. "He is goading us," Merrick said, his voice a low, deadly growl. "He wants me to lock you away. He wants me to hide in my own despair. He wants me to feed the curse." His eyes met mine, and in their depths I saw he understood. He understood the words from the journal without ever having read them. He understood the nature of the trap. He turned to face the entire hall, his voice ringing with the cold, clear authority of a king going to war. "Jorund," he commanded, "the pack is yours to command in my absence. Varya, you will see to the seer's comfort. She will remain here as our counsel." He looked back at me, his hand still on my arm. His touch was no longer a brand of his pain, but a promise of shared vengeance. The chasm that had opened between us was gone, bridged by the certainty of a common enemy and a shared path. "We undertake the trial of two souls," he declared, his voice echoing off the ancient stones. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low whisper, meant only for me, a vow spoken in the face of all the shadows that hunted us. He wants to turn us against each other. He wants to shatter our bond. A fierce, predatory smile, the first I had seen in days, touched his lips. Then let him try. We left before the dawn. The air in the courtyard was sharp and painfully cold, each breath a cloud of white vapor in the pre-dawn gloom. There was no grand ceremony, no war party to see us off. There was only the hushed, grim finality of a secret departure. We traveled light. 2 formidable war horses, saddlebags packed with dried rations, warm furs, and the weapons Merrick had forged with his own hands. Jorund and Varya stood with the seer, Lyra, near the gate, their faces carved from stone in the flickering torchlight. They were the only ones who knew our true destination. To the rest of the pack, we were on a diplomatic mission to a northern ally, a necessary lie to prevent panic. Jorund clasped Merrick's forearm, the grip of a beta pledging his life to his alpha's will. "Guard her well, my king," he said, his voice a low gravel. Then he turned to me, his gaze fierce and unwavering. "And you, my queen, bring him home." It was the first time he had ever called me queen. Varya stepped forward, her scarred face softened by a profound, raw emotion. She took my gloved hands in her own, her grip surprisingly strong. "The storm is in you, Luna," she said, her voice rough with unshed tears. "Do not be afraid to let it rage." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. These wolves, who had once looked at me with such contempt, were now placing the fate of their king, their entire world, in my hands. The weight of that trust was a heavier burden than any saddlebag. Merrick lifted me onto my horse, then swung up behind me onto his own great black stallion, Draven. He preferred we ride as one, his body a living shield around mine, his arm wrapped securely around my waist, pulling me back against the hard warmth of his chest. With a final solemn nod to our small party of confidants, he urged Draven forward, and we rode out of the gates of Winterfang, leaving the warm lights of our home behind as we plunged into the vast, waiting darkness. For 3 days we rode south, down from the high, familiar peaks of our own territory, and into the rolling foothills that bordered the ancient forests. The journey was hard and fast, but Myrick's presence was a constant grounding force. The wall of guilt and despair he had erected between us was gone, replaced by a focused, diamond-hard resolve. We spoke little, conserving our energy, but our silence was no longer one of distance. It was the easy, understanding silence of 2 wolves moving as one, their senses and purpose aligned. At night, we made cold camps, taking turns at watch, and he would hold me as we slept, his body a furnace against the encroaching chill, his breathing a steady rhythm that soothed the frantic beating of my heart. The black marks on my arms still pulsed with a faint, malevolent cold, a constant reminder of our enemy, but the fear it once inspired was being burned away by the heat of our shared purpose. On the morning of the 4th day, we saw it. A line of trees, darker than any forest I had ever known, stretched across the horizon. As we drew closer, an unnatural stillness fell over the land. The chirping of birds ceased. The rustle of small animals in the undergrowth died away. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "The silent woods," Merrick murmured, his voice a low vibration against my back. His arm tightened around me. "Lyra's maps mark this as the only path to the valley where the citadel lies." The edge of the forest was like a physical wall. The trees were ancient, gnarled things, their bark the color of old blood and their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. A thick, gray mist clung to the ground, swallowing the light and muffling all sound. As our horses took their first hesitant steps under the canopy of black leaves, the world changed. It was as if we had been plunged underwater. The air grew heavy, thick, and oppressive, making each breath a conscious effort. But the sound, or lack thereof, was the most unnerving. The thud of the horse's hooves on the damp earth was reduced to a dull, muted puff. The creak of our leather harnesses was swallowed by the silence. When I spoke Merrick's name, the words seemed to die just past my lips. A flat, dead thing with no echo, no resonance. Worse, the connection to our inner selves, to the magic that defined us, was suppressed. My storm, the vibrant, roaring power that had become a part of my very being, was now a distant, muffled hum, like a song heard through a thick stone wall. I could feel it, but I couldn't reach it. It was a terrifying sensation, like losing a limb. I glanced at Merrick. His face was a stoic mask, but I could feel the tension coiled in his body. His own wolf, the fierce, dominant spirit of the Alpha King, was similarly muted, pacing restlessly behind a barrier he could not breach. We were cut off. We were blind. We were, for the first time, truly alone. We rode deeper into the woods, the oppressive silence stretching for hours. There were no paths, only the endless, repeating maze of black trees and gray mist. A creeping paranoia began to set in. Every flicker of shadow in my peripheral vision felt like a watching eye. Every snapped twig under Draven's hoof, despite its muted sound, was a jarring announcement of our presence in a place that demanded absolute quiet. As dusk began to bleed through the thick canopy, turning the gray mist to a bruised purple, Merrick finally called a halt. We made camp in a small clearing, if it could be called that, where the trees were slightly less dense. The fire we built was a pathetic, sullen thing. The flames seemed to struggle for air, casting a weak, sickly orange glow that did little to push back the encroaching shadows. We sat huddled together, sharing a strip of dried meat in the crushing silence. I could feel the old demons beginning to stir in Merrick. In this place, stripped of our magic and our heightened senses, we were left with nothing but our own thoughts. And his, I knew, were turning dark. The journal's words echoed in my mind. The curse fed on that fear, turning it into a blight. His hand, which rested on his knee, was clenched into a fist. "This place," he finally said, his voice a rough, strained whisper that barely carried the few feet between us. "It feels like the curse, an emptiness, a void, where there should be life." He looked at me, and in the dim firelight, I saw the guilt returning to his eyes. "I brought you here, into this." "No," I said immediately, my own voice a low, fierce whisper. I reached out and covered his fist with my hand, my fingers lacing through his. "We came here, together. Don't let this place trick you, Merrick. Don't let it whisper the sorcerer's lies into your ear. Your doubt is his strength. Our trust is his poison." He stared at our joined hands, his thumb stroking the back of my palm. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally. He was fighting. He was actively battling the ingrained self-loathing that had been his companion for a lifetime. He took a deep, shuddering breath and brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. "You are right," he breathed. "My quiet, my anchor." He was about to say more when Draven, who had been standing listlessly nearby, suddenly tossed his head, his ears swiveling. A low, nervous snort escaped him. My own horse shifted, her eyes wide in the gloom. The animals could feel something we couldn't. Merrick was on his feet in an instant, the warrior king replacing the tormented man. He drew the great double-edged sword from his back, the whisper of steel sliding from the scabbard unnaturally loud in the dead air. I stood with him, my own smaller dagger in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. We scanned the perimeter of our small camp, the impenetrable wall of trees and mist. There was nothing, no sound, no scent, no movement, and yet we were being watched. The feeling was a physical thing, a prickling on the back of my neck, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the damp air. Then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the deepest shadows between two of the gnarled trees. It wasn't a wolf or a man. It was a patch of darkness that was darker than the surrounding night, a piece of the void that seemed to have detached itself and was now gliding toward us. Another appeared to its left, and another to its right. "Shadehounds," Merrick growled, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Creatures of shadow and spite. They are drawn to the scent of his magic." He meant his curse. He was a beacon, a lure for the forest's nightmares. They didn't charge. They flowed out of the mist, silent as smoke, their forms coalescing as they drew nearer. They were vaguely canine in shape, but their bodies were woven from shadow, their limbs unnaturally long and thin. They had no faces, only a pair of glowing, malevolent embers for eyes, like the last dying coals of a hateful fire. There were at least a dozen of them, forming a tightening circle around our camp. The first one attacked. It didn't leap, it stretched, its shadowy form elongating until it was a spear of pure night, aiming for Merrick's throat. Merrick met it with a powerful, cleaving blow, his sword, forged in Winterfang's sacred fires and bearing the faint blessing of our pack, flared with a brief silver light as it made contact. The creature dissolved with a faint, sighing hiss like water on hot stone. But two more immediately took its place, their claws of solidified darkness swiping at him from either tan. He fought like a demon, a whirlwind of steel and fury in the sullen firelight. His strength was immense, his skill unmatched. But the hounds were relentless. They were not solid. Blows that would have shattered the bones of a normal beast merely passed through them, causing them to dissipate for a moment before reforming. Only a direct, perfectly timed strike seemed to destroy them. And Marek was a beacon. They ignored me completely, their entire focus on him, on the dark energy of the curse that was a feast to their insubstantial forms. I tried to fight, but my dagger was useless against them. The shadow simply parted around the blade. I was a spectator to a battle that was slowly, inevitably, turning against us. Merrick was tiring, his movements losing their crisp economy. One of the creatures finally slipped past his guard, its shadowy claws raking across his arm. No blood was drawn, but Merrick cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. Where the claws had touched, his sleeve was blackened, and the skin beneath felt burned by an unholy cold. They were not just attacking his body, they were draining his life force, feeding on the very energy that fueled him. Another hound latched onto his leg, and I saw the curse on his neck, visible above the collar of his tunic, flare with a sickly black light. The creature was drawing power directly from it, strengthening itself while weakening him. He stumbled, going down on one knee, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The circle of hounds tightened, their ember eyes glowing with hungry anticipation. Seeing him falter, seeing the life being siphoned out of him, broke something inside me. The terror, the helplessness, the rage. It all coalesced into a single defiant roar in my soul. My power, my storm, was still there, trapped behind the magical suppression of the woods. I could feel it beating against the walls of its prison, desperate to answer my call, to protect my mate. I would not let him die, not here, not like this. I closed my eyes and reached inward, not with a gentle call, but with a primal scream of will. I clawed at the barrier, tearing at the thick, suffocating blanket of silence that smothered my spirit. For a moment, there was only resistance, a crushing, absolute pressure. Then, with a feeling like bone and sinew tearing, something gave way. Power, raw and uncontrolled, exploded from me. It was not the cool, gentle light of healing. It was the unrestrained fury of a blizzard, the cataclysmic birth of a star. A nova of pure, blue-white energy erupted from my body in a silent, expanding sphere. There was no sound, but the force of it was a physical blow, throwing Merrick flat and blasting me off my feet. The fire in our camp was instantly extinguished, its embers turned to ice. The very air flash froze, turning the mist into a swirling tempest of razor-sharp ice crystals. The shadehounds, caught in the blast, never stood a chance. They didn't just dissipate, they were annihilated, their shadowy forms torn apart and vaporized by the sheer, unadulterated force of the light. For a single blinding moment, the clearing was illuminated with the light of a false dawn. Every gnarled tree, every frozen leaf, etched in impossible, stark detail. Then, as quickly as it came, the light vanished. Darkness and a profound, ringing silence rushed back in. I lay on the frozen ground, my body trembling from the violent backlash of forcing my power through the barrier. The black marks on my arm were glowing with a faint residual blue light, and the unnatural cold that had lived in them was gone, burned away by my own magic. I pushed myself up, my gaze frantically searching the darkness. "Merrick?" A groan came from a few feet away. He was getting to his feet, shaking his head as if to clear it. He looked around the clearing. The shadehounds were gone. The oppressive, magical silence of the woods felt thinner, cracked. The air still vibrated with the echo of my power. The trees nearest to us were coated in a thick, shimmering layer of frost, a perfect circle of winter in the heart of the cursed forest. He stared at the impossible frost, then his gaze found me. He moved to my side in 2 strides, his hands hovering over me as if afraid to touch. His eyes, wide with a mixture of awe and dawning horror, searched my face. "You saved us," he breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that made me tremble. He then lifted his gaze, looking up through the canopy as if he could see past the black leaves and into the starless sky beyond. The awe in his face was slowly being replaced by a grim, terrible certainty. "Yes," he said, his voice dropping to a low, fatalistic rumble. His eyes met mine again, and in them I saw the full weight of what I had done. "And in this dead, silent world, you have just lit a bonfire. You have just screamed our location to the one being we were trying to hide from." There was no time for awe, no time for fear. Merrick's grim prediction had seared away everything but the primal, urgent need for survival. The moment he spoke, the hunt was on. He grabbed my hand, his grip like iron, and pulled me toward the horses. There was no discussion, no plan B, there was only flight. "We don't stop," he commanded, his voice a low, hard command, as he threw me onto my horse and vaulted onto Draven. "Not for anything. We ride until we are out of this cursed forest." He was wrong. We were never leaving the forest. The forest was now coming for us. We galloped through the unnatural twilight, the horses' hooves pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against the damp earth. The magical suppression had been fractured by my power burst, but the woods were not inert. The sorcerer, now aware of our presence, began to exert his will. The very trees seemed to warp and twist as we passed, their branches lashing out like whips, forcing us to swerve and duck. Gnarled roots, thick as a wolf's thigh, erupted from the ground directly in our path, seeking to trip the horses and send us sprawling. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a chorus of malicious whispers that slithered through the mist, just at the edge of hearing. They were formless, venomous things, weaving in and out of the sound of the wind, speaking our deepest fears aloud. "Wolfless Omega." The whispers hissed, a sound meant only for me, a cruel reminder of the shame I had carried for so long. "You think a single spark makes you a flame. He will cast you aside when he is whole." I gritted my teeth, ignoring the poison, my focus narrowed to the powerful back of the man riding just ahead of me. But the whispers targeting Merrick were far more insidious. I saw him flinch as a voice, sounding chillingly like his father's, curled through the air. "Baron King, you lead her to her death, just as you failed to save me. This is your legacy, son. A throne of bones, and a line ending in ash." Merrick let out a furious roar, a sound of pure primal rage, and spurred Draven on faster, trying to outrun the ghosts of his own bloodline. The curse on his neck pulsed with a faint black light, feeding on his anguish. This was the sorcerer's true attack. Not with claws, but with memory. Not with beasts, but with the poison of despair. "Don't listen," I shouted, my voice feeling small and thin against the malevolent chorus. "He's trying to separate us. He's using your own pain against you." Suddenly, the path ahead was blocked. A wall of shimmering, spectral figures materialized from the mist, their forms translucent and wavering. They were wolves, warriors of the Winterstorm pack, but their eyes were hollow sockets of sorrow, and their bodies were riddled with ghostly wounds. They were phantoms, echoes of every pack member Marek had ever lost in battle, every soul he carried on his kingly conscience. At their head stood a tall, broad-shouldered figure with Merrick's jawline and his father's haunted eyes, the phantom of the previous Alpha King. Our horses reared, screaming in terror. Merrick stared at the specter of his father, his face a mask of torment. The Phantom King raised a spectral hand and pointed a finger at Merrick, his silent accusation more damning than any shout. "It's not real," I screamed, sliding from my horse. My own power, the storm inside me, was a seething knot of fury. I would not let the shadow puppeteer break him. I planted my feet on the ground and held out my hands. I didn't try to unleash the violent, uncontrolled Nova from before. Instead, I called on the quiet, the stillness, the pure, cold light at the heart of the storm. A soft blue-white luminescence gathered in my palms. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of truth. It was the light that illuminates, the light that banishes shadows not by burning them, but by showing them for what they are, empty. I pushed the light forward, not as a blast, but as a gentle, inexorable wave. As my light washed over the phantoms, they began to fray at the edges, their forms dissolving like smoke in a strong wind. The whispers shrieked, a sound of frustrated rage, and the ghostly figures dissipated, leaving only the silent, gnarled trees. The ghost of Merrick's father was the last to go, his accusatory gaze holding his sons for a moment longer before vanishing into nothingness. Merrick was breathing heavily, his knuckles white where he gripped Draven's reins. He looked from the empty space where the phantoms had been to me, his eyes filled with a dawning, fierce clarity. He saw not a liability he had to protect, but an ally, a partner, the other half of his own strength. He didn't need to speak. The understanding that passed between us was absolute. He was the sword, and I was the shield. He fought the physical threat, and I fought the poison aimed at the soul. With a sharp nod, we were moving again, a single unit, a king and his storm, now fighting as one. We broke free of the silent woods at last, galloping out from under the oppressive canopy and into a valley of gray stone and dead grass. The relief was short-lived. Before us lay a sight of profound and unnatural desolation. A lake, vast and perfectly circular, filled the valley floor. Its water was not blue or green, but a flat, oily black that did not reflect the bruised and overcast sky. No birds circled its shores, no reeds grew in its shallows. A faint, cloying scent of decay and stagnant magic hung in the air, a stench of something that had been dead for a very, very long time. And in the center of the lake, visible beneath the still dark water, was a drowned skeleton. The sunken citadel, its towers were like broken ribs jutting from a sunken carcass, its great central dome like a half-submerged skull. It was a place of profound wrongness, a monument to a hateful, siphoning power. "The source," Merrick breathed, his voice grim. The curse on his neck was pulsing steadily now, a slow, rhythmic throb, like a moth beating its wings against a lantern, drawn to the flame of its own destruction. A stone causeway, slick with black algae, led from the shore to a point directly above the citadel's main gate. As we approached, the impossible happened. The black water of the lake began to part. With a low, grinding groan, a whirlpool formed, but in reverse. The water was not being sucked down, but pushed away, creating a dry, descending staircase of stone that led from the end of the causeway down into the dark, waiting maw of the citadel's entrance. It was a trap. It was a blatant, obvious, and utterly unavoidable trap. The enemy was not hiding. He was inviting us in. "He grows arrogant," Merrick growled, dismounting. He drew his sword, its silver length seeming to drink the dim light. "He thinks because he has seen your power, he can control it. He thinks our only option is to walk into his parlor," I finished, sliding from my own horse and drawing my dagger. My hand was steady. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a white-hot, righteous anger. This sorcerer had tormented Merrick's family for generations. He had stolen my power. He had tried to turn us against each other. Now we were coming to his door to collect the debt. We walked down the dripping stone steps. The waters of the lake held back on either side of us like walls of liquid night. The air grew cold and heavy, tasting of wet stone and something metallic, like old blood. The moment we stepped through the great arching gateway of the citadel, the water crashed down behind us, the sound a deafening roar of finality. The staircase was gone. We were sealed in. The interior of the citadel was a nightmare of architecture. The corridors were not straight but curved, like the veins and arteries of some colossal beast. The stone walls, slick with moisture, seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly luminescence. Writhing runes were carved into every surface, not glowing with power, but dark and inert, like tattoos on dead skin. The oppressive atmosphere was a physical weight, designed to crush the spirit. The pull on Merrick's curse was an undeniable compass, leading us deeper into the labyrinth. We moved with our backs to one another, a slow, revolving circle of vigilance. Merrick's sword, ready for a physical threat, my senses alert for a magical one. We passed through vast, empty chambers that felt like hollowed-out organs, their purpose lost to time, but their lingering aura of pain and suffering a palpable miasma. Finally, we reached the heart. A pair of immense, iron-bound doors stood before us, and the pull of the curse was an agonizing, irresistible siren song from beyond them. Myrick put his shoulder to the door and pushed. With a groan of rusted metal, it swung inward, revealing the source of all our pain. It was not a throne room or a study, it was a place of sacrifice. The chamber was circular, its domed ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. In the very center stood a jagged black altar of obsidian, its surface crisscrossed with channels designed to carry blood. But it was what hovered above the altar that stole our breath. It was a heart. A human-sized heart, but made of a pulsing, crystalline shadow. It was petrified, yet it beat with a slow, malevolent rhythm. From this dark heart, 1,000 thin, black, vein-like tendrils snaked out, connecting to the runes on the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The entire chamber was a living circuit board of siphoning magic. And one of those tendrils, thicker and darker than the rest, pulsed with a sickly black light in perfect time with the throb of the curse on Merrick's neck. This was it, the anchor, the tether that had bound his line for centuries. The trial of two souls, I whispered, understanding dawning. Lyra said we had to weave our souls into one, here. Merrick moved toward the altar, his sword held ready, his face a mask of grim determination. Then let us finish it. Wait, I said, a sudden cold premonition gripping me. Something was wrong. The seer's words, the ease of our entry, the blatant display of the curse's heart. It was too simple. I reached out, my instincts screaming at me, and laid my hand flat on the cold obsidian of the altar. The moment my skin made contact, a vision, brutal and absolute, exploded behind my eyes. I was not me. I was the ancient sorcerer, centuries ago, standing in this very room. I felt his triumph as he finished the ritual, casting the curse. I saw him tether the Drovan Alpha's doubt, creating the first link. But I saw more. I saw the prophecy he wove into the magic itself, a final contingency, a false hope, the prophecy of the trial of two souls. I saw his intent, clear as glass. He knew that one day a power might arise to challenge his curse, and he had planned for it. The trial wasn't a cure, it was the final harvest. The ritual wasn't meant for us to perform. It was meant to be performed on us. The weaving of two souls was a lie. It was a ritual to use my storm-awakened power as a key to unlock Myrick's soul completely, ripping his life force out in one final, glorious feast, and pouring it, and my own power, into the sorcerer, granting him true immortality. Lyra had not lied. She had been a pawn, a seer who had read the false prophecy the sorcerer himself had written into the threads of fate. She had sent us here to complete her master's greatest work. The vision faded, leaving me gasping, my hand still pressed to the altar. The horrifying truth crashed down on me. "Merrick, it's a trap!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The trial, it's not for us, it's for him!" But it was too late. The moment I spoke the words, the moment I understood the truth, the trap sprung. With a deafening clang, the great doors slammed shut behind us. Every rune in the chamber flared to life, not with light, but with an absorbing, profound darkness that seemed to drink the very air. The black tendrils connected to the walls detached, whipping through the air like living, venomous snakes. Before Merrick could even react, a dozen of them wrapped around his limbs, his torso, his neck, pinning him, lifting him from the ground and holding him suspended in the air before the dark, beating heart. He roared, fighting against them, his muscles straining, but the tendrils were made of pure magic. They held him fast. The main tether, the one connected to his curse, pulsed violently, and the black marks on his skin erupted, covering his body in a web of writhing, dark energy. He cried out, his head thrown back in agony as his life force was siphoned at a terrifying, accelerated rate. The runes on the floor around me glowed, and I felt my own power being suppressed, smothered, my connection to my inner storm severed more completely than it had ever been in the silent woods. I was powerless, a bird in a cage of dark magic. A voice, ancient and triumphant, echoed through the chamber, coming not from one place, but from the very stones around us. It was a dry, sibilant whisper, saturated with the smug satisfaction of a plan. Centuries in the making, finally coming to fruition. "So the little moon finally understands," the sorcerer hissed, the sound wrapping around us like a funeral shroud. "You were never the cure, child. You were always the key. Your power was the force needed to open the final lock. Thank you for bringing it, and my long overdue feast. directly to my door. Trapped. The word was a universe of despair. Merrick was suspended in the air, a prisoner of living shadows, his body convulsing as the curse, now fully awakened, feasted on his life force. His roars of defiance had become guttural sounds of pure agony, each one a hammer blow against my heart. I was rooted to the spot, encased in a field of suffocating magic that severed my connection to my inner storm. I was wolfless again, powerless, a spectator to the slow, ritualistic murder of my mate. He brought this upon himself. The sorcerer's voice slithered through the chamber, a venomous whisper that coiled around my soul. He was not just speaking, he was probing, seeking the cracks in my resolve. His doubt, his pride. He walked into my arms to prove his strength, and in doing so, he has given me yours. Tendrils of darkness, thinner than the ones holding Merrick, rose from the glowing runes on the floor around me. They were not aggressive, they were exploratory, like the questing antennae of a predatory insect. They brushed against my arms, my legs, my throat, and with each touch, I felt a sickening drain. He wasn't just suppressing my power, he was tasting it, savoring it, preparing to devour it whole. No, I choked out, my voice a pathetic rasp. I pulled at the invisible bonds, my muscles straining against the magical cage, but it was like trying to fight the tide. Myrick's head lolled, his strength fading. The fierce light in his glacial eyes was dimming, replaced by a gray haze of exhaustion and pain. He managed to lift his head, his gaze finding mine across the chamber. His lips moved, forming my name in a silent, desperate plea. It was not a plea for rescue. He knew I was as trapped as he was. It was a plea for forgiveness, for leading me here, for failing. Seeing that look, that utter despair in the eyes of the strongest man I had ever known, shattered the last of my fear. It cauterized the wound of my helplessness and forged it into something hard and sharp. Rage. A pure, cold, incandescent fury that had nothing to do with my stolen power and everything to do with the soul of the woman who would not, could not, watch her mate be destroyed. Your anger is useless, the sorcerer mocked, sensing the shift in me. It is just spice for the meal to come. The tendrils around me tightened, their exploratory touch turning into a hungry grip. They began to pull, not just at my energy, but at my very essence, trying to drag the dormant storm from the depths of my soul. I felt a tearing sensation, a spiritual violation that was 1,000 times worse than any physical pain. My vision began to tunnel, the edges turning dark as my life force was drawn toward the crystalline heart hanging above the altar. This was it, the final harvest, the end. But as the darkness closed in, a thought, clear and defiant, cut through the pain. The sorcerer was a parasite. His magic was one of tethers and siphons. He did not create, he only stole. My power, the storm inside me, was a part of me. It was woven into the fabric of my being. He could not simply take it. He had to pull it from me, which meant, for a fraction of a second, the connection was still mine. The cage had a key, and I was holding it. I stopped fighting against the tendrils. I stopped pulling back. To the sorcerer, it must have felt like I was finally surrendering, my will broken. But I was doing the opposite. I was leaning in. I focused every last ounce of my will, my love, my rage, not on the power he was stealing, but on the one thing in this room he could never touch. My bond with Merrick. I poured everything I was into that connection. It was no longer a gentle flow of healing light, but a desperate, silent scream of pure intent. Merrick, look at me, not with your eyes, with your soul. He thinks this cage is our prison, but our bond is his. He has tethered himself to us. Feel me. Across the room, Merrick's head snapped up. His dimming eyes widened. I felt a flicker of recognition, a faint, questioning pulse through the bond. He felt it. He felt me. Not the powerless woman trapped in a circle of runes, but the essence of his mate, the other half of his soul, calling to him across the void. A futile gesture, the sorcerer hissed, a note of irritation entering his voice. The tendrils around me began to pull harder, the tearing sensation intensifying. He was trying to rip the connection apart before it could fully form. Don't fight the curse, my love, I projected, my thoughts a frantic, desperate torrent. Don't fight the tendrils, that's his battle. That's the physical world. Our fight is here, in the space between us. He feeds on your doubt, so trust me now. Trust me as you never have before. Let go of the guilt. Let go of the fear. Let go of everything but me. It was the greatest gamble of our lives. I was asking him to surrender to the very thing that was killing him. I was asking him to stop fighting, to lay his soul bare, and to trust that I would be there to catch him. I felt his hesitation, the lifetime of ingrained self-loathing, the warrior's instinct to never give up. I felt the seed of doubt, the one the curse had nurtured for so long, whispering that this was a trick, that he would be annihilated. I am your quiet, Merrick, I pleaded, my own consciousness beginning to fade under the strain. I am your anchor. Let go, and then he did. I felt the shift through the bond, a profound, terrifying release. He stopped straining against the tendrils. He stopped fighting the agonizing pull of the curse. He let it all go, and in that void, in that absolute surrender, he turned the entirety of his spirit, his will, his love, his very being, toward me. He poured himself into our bond, a rushing tidal wave of pure, unconditional trust. The sorcerer let out a shriek of triumph, believing Myrick's spirit had finally broken. The siphoning intensified, the great crystalline heart pulsing with a furious, greedy light. The tendrils holding Merrick began to glow, conduits for the final massive transfer of power. But the power wasn't just flowing from Merrick to the heart. It was now flowing through the bond between us. Merrick had, in his act of ultimate trust, opened the floodgates. He had given me everything. And my soul, my spirit, even severed from my magic, swelled with the influx of his raw, indomitable life force. I was no longer just me, I was us. The sorcerer had made a fatal error. He had assumed our powers were separate things to be stolen and consumed individually. He had never comprehended the nature of a true mate bond, that two souls could become so intertwined they were no longer divisible. He had tried to siphon from two wells, and in his greed, he had allowed them to merge into a single, unstoppable river. The tendrils around me, still pulling, trying to rip my dormant power from its cage, suddenly had a new target. They were connected to a soul that was now roaring with the combined life force of an alpha king and his mate. The siphoning reversed. A sound of shocked, infuriated disbelief echoed from the walls. The tendrils around me, which had been pulling, were now conduits. A torrent of raw energy, Merrick's life force, amplified by my own, fueled by our combined will, began to pour from me, through the tendrils, and into the Citadel's magical matrix. The runes on the floor around me, designed to suppress, were now being overloaded. They sputtered, flickered from black to a searing, angry red. The sorcerer tried to shut it down, to sever the connection, but it was too late. I had my hand on the pump, and Merrick was the wellspring. I pushed, feeding the Citadel's dark magic with a torrent of life it was never designed to handle. "Witch, what are you doing?" the sorcerer shrieked, his voice now laced with the first hint of genuine fear. The circle of runes around me exploded in a shower of stone and crimson light. The cage was broken, and my storm was free. It did not awaken with a roar. It awakened with the silent, absolute cold of the void between stars. The suppressed power, now unleashed and supercharged with Merrick's life force, erupted from me. The air in the chamber flash froze. A filigree of impossible frost spread from my feet, racing across the floor, up the walls, coating every dark, runic surface in a layer of shimmering, power-devouring ice. The glowing red runes winked out one by one, their magic choked and frozen into silence, the tendrils holding me shattered into a million frozen shards. I stood free in the center of a maelstrom of my own making, my eyes glowing with a light that was no longer just blue, but a burning silver white, the color of a winter moon at its zenith. I was no longer a shield. I was a reckoning. I lifted my head and looked at the great crystalline heart. It was the source, the anchor, and it was still draining my mate. I raised my hands, and the full, unrestrained fury of my power answered. It was not a nova of uncontrolled energy this time. It was a focused, channeled lance of pure, absolute cold. A beam of silver-white light, silent and unstoppable, shot from my hands and struck the dark, beating heart. There was no explosion. There was only a profound, crystalline shattering. The heart did not break apart. It was unmade. The dark magic that held it together was annihilated, its structure collapsing at a molecular level. It imploded, turning into a cloud of glittering black dust that was instantly frozen by the residual cold. The moment the heart was destroyed, the tether was broken. The 1,000 black tendrils connected to the walls and ceiling convulsed, then went limp, turning to dust and falling to the frozen floor. The tendrils holding Merrick vanished. He fell. His body, suddenly released, dropped like a stone toward the obsidian altar below. With a cry, I threw myself forward, a wave of frigid air cushioning his fall, just enough that he landed on the altar with a heavy, jarring thud, instead of a fatal, bone-shattering impact. I scrambled onto the altar beside him. He was alive, unconscious, but alive. The writhing black web of the curse was gone from his skin, but in its place, the original mark on his neck was glowing with a malevolent dying light, a final, spiteful pulse of the severed magic. His breathing was shallow, his life force depleted to a dangerously low ebb. The trial was won, the tether was broken, but the victory was hollow if I could not bring him back from the brink. A low, guttural chuckle echoed through the chamber, weak but filled with undiluted hatred. You have broken your toy, little moon. You have severed my connection, yes. But the poison remains in his blood. He will die, slowly and in agony, and you will watch. I am immortal. I will simply wait another century and find another bloodline to feed upon. You have won nothing. The sorcerer's voice was fading, his presence in the citadel receding, as his power source crumbled. He was right. Breaking the tether had not removed the poison. It had only stopped the siphoning. Merrick was still dying. I looked down at my mate, at his pale, still face. I looked at the fading cursed mark on his neck. And I looked at my own hands, which still thrummed with a power I was only just beginning to comprehend. The power of a winter storm. The power of absolute cold. Poison needs a medium to exist. It needs warmth. It needs life. What if I didn't try to heal the poison? What if I didn't try to neutralize it? What if I froze it? It was a terrifying, insane idea. An act of such magical brutality, it could kill him just as easily as the curse. But as I looked at his fading life, I knew it was the only choice we had left. I am not just the quiet, Merrick, I whispered, my voice trembling as I laid my glowing hands on either side of his face. I am not just the anchor. I leaned down, my forehead resting against his, my lips close to his ear. I closed my eyes and called upon the deepest, coldest, most absolute aspect of my power. I am the storm, I vowed, and the storm has come for you. I unleashed it, not as a weapon, but as a final, desperate act of purification. A wave of profound, soul-deep cold poured from my hands into his body, targeting the last vestiges of the curse. I felt his body arch in a silent scream, as the absolute zero of my magic met the malevolent heat of the poison. For a terrible, eternal second, two opposing forces of nature warred within his very veins. Then with a final, sighing release, the last glow of the curse on his neck winked out, its magic not just broken, but frozen, shattered, and utterly annihilated. He went still, terribly, completely still. His chest did not rise, his heart did not beat. I had done it. I had saved him from the curse, only to kill him with the cure. A sob of pure, undiluted agony tore from my throat, echoing in the vast, frozen silence of the dead citadel. Time ceased to exist. There was only the vast, frozen silence of the chamber and the unbearable stillness of the man lying on the black altar. My sob tore through the silence, a raw, ragged sound of ultimate failure. It was the only sound in the dead heart of the citadel. I had won the war against a centuries-old sorcerer, only to lose everything that mattered in the final, desperate battle. My hand trembled as I laid it on Merrick's chest, over the place where his strong, steady heart should be beating. There was nothing, no thrum of life, no faint flutter of a spirit clinging to its mortal shell, only a profound, unnatural cold that seemed to radiate from his very bones, a cold I had put there. No, I whispered, the word a prayer, a denial, a curse. No, 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 I pressed my ear to his chest, listening, pleading with the universe, with the moon goddess, with any entity that might hear me, to give me a sign. There was only silence. The silence of the void. The storm inside me, The great cataclysmic power that I had unleashed was now a quiet, hollow thing. It had answered my call, it had purged the poison, but the cost had been absolute. The silver-white light that had blazed from my hands faded, leaving me feeling empty, scoured out. A vessel that had poured out its entire contents and was now left with nothing but the dregs of despair. I slumped over his body, my forehead resting on his still chest, the cold of his skin a mirror of the encroaching ice in my own soul. This was a prison far worse than the gilded cage I had first inhabited in Winterfang. This was a tomb, and I was its sole, eternal occupant, forever chained to the memory of what my own power had wrought. The whispers of the sorcerer, his final parting curse, echoed in my mind. You have won nothing, he was right. Vengeance was a hollow victory. Power was a cruel joke. I would have traded all of it, every last spark, to feel the simple, steady beat of Merrick's heart beneath my hand again. My tears, hot and stinging, fell onto the cold leather of his tunic, freezing into tiny, glittering crystals of grief upon impact. It was my fault. I had demanded this trial. I had pushed him, challenged him, refused to let him face his demons alone, and in my arrogance, in my desperate need to prove myself his equal, I had led him to this. The disgraced Omega, the wolfless whelp, had finally found her power and had used it to murder a king. My sister would have been a better Luna. She would have been wise, political. She would have never gambled her alpha's life on a surge of untamed, untested magic. A new sound broke the silence, a soft rhythmic cracking. At first I thought it was the citadel settling, the frozen stones groaning under the strain of my magic. But it was closer. It was coming from him. I lifted my head, my tear-filled eyes widening. A fine web-like pattern of cracks was spreading across the surface of the obsidian altar, originating from where Merrick's body lay. The stone itself was breaking apart. Then I saw it. The thinnest, most delicate layer of shimmering frost that had coated Merrick's skin, a residual effect of my power, was beginning to sublimate, turning directly into a fine, ethereal mist that rose from his body like a departing soul. And beneath that mist, something was happening. A faint, impossibly soft light began to glow from within his chest. It was not the cold silver white of my storm, nor the angry black of the curse. It was a warm, gentle gold, the color of the sun's first rays on a winter morning. It pulsed once, softly. My breath caught in my throat. I stared, not daring to believe. The golden light pulsed again, stronger this time. It was his heart. No, it was more than his heart. It was his wolf, his soul. The core of his being, which had been suppressed and poisoned for a lifetime, was finally, truly, free. The curse had not just been a siphon. It had been a cage around his spirit. And my magic, in its absolute cold, had not killed him. It had shattered the cage. The light swelled, spreading through his veins, a river of liquid sunlight chasing away the last of the unnatural chill. The pale, deathly pallor of his skin was replaced by a healthy, living warmth that radiated outward. The cracking of the altar intensified, and with a final groaning shudder, the black stone crumbled into a pile of glittering dust, leaving us on the bare floor of the chamber. And then he took a breath. It was not a gasp. It was a deep, shuddering, life-affirming inhalation, the first true, clean breath he had ever taken. His lungs filled with air untainted by ancient malice. His blood flowed through veins, unburdened by a generational poison. His eyes snapped open. They were no longer glacial ice flecked with silver. The ice was gone, melted away. In its place was the pure, clear, brilliant silver of a winter moon, blazing with a life and power that stunned me into silence. He looked at me, his gaze sharp and clear, and in those silver eyes I saw not the haunted king or the tormented warrior, but the soul of the man I loved, whole and untarnished for the first time. Lysandra, he rasped, his voice rough from disuse, but it was his voice, full of warmth and life. He reached up, his hand, no longer cold, cupping my cheek. His thumb brushed away a frozen tear. You are crying. A laugh, choked with relief and disbelief, bubbled up from my chest. It was a wild, hysterical sound. I thought I'd killed you. A slow, easy smile spread across his face. A smile of such genuine, unburdened peace that it transformed his entire countenance. The hard lines of pain that had been etched around his eyes and mouth for his entire life were gone. He looked younger, freer. "You did," he murmured, his silver eyes drinking me in. "You killed the Baron King. You killed the cursed thing that wore his face. But you did not kill me." He pushed himself up into a sitting position, his movements fluid and strong, all trace of his ordeal gone. "You saved me." He looked down at his own hands, turning them over, marveling at the feeling of his own untainted strength. He touched the spot on his neck, where the curse had lived for so long. There was no mark, no scar, no discoloration, only clean, healthy skin. The last physical trace of the sorcerer's evil had been completely erased. He looked at me again, his expression one of profound, humbling awe. "I felt it," he said, his voice low. "When your power came, I felt the poison freeze, shatter. And then, for the first time, I felt my own wolf, my true self, without the shadow hanging over it. It was quiet, the way you described. My storm had brought him his quiet. The realization was a dizzying, beautiful paradox. My wildness had brought him peace. My fury had brought him healing. We were not just two broken halves of a whole. We were the balance, the storm and the stillness, each containing the seed of the other. "And you," he said, his gaze turning intense, possessive, the Alpha King returning, but this time without the darkness. He reached out and took my right arm, his fingers gently tracing the spot where the black brand had been. Like his own mark, it was gone, leaving no trace. "The sorcerer marked you. It is a debt that has not been fully paid." A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was no longer born of pain, but of pure predatory intent. "His voice is gone from this place," Merrick said, his eyes scanning the frozen chamber. "But he is not destroyed. He is immortal," he said. "He will wait." His hand tightened on my arm. The winter storm pack does not wait for its enemies to recover. I knew what he was thinking. The sorcerer was a spirit, a disembodied parasite, his power now shattered, his anchor destroyed. But he still existed, a malevolent consciousness adrift in the world. He would rebuild. He would find another host, another bloodline. Our victory here was not an end, merely a reprieve. "How do we kill a ghost?" I asked, my voice steady. Merrick's silver eyes gleamed in the dim light. "A spirit without a tether is just a whisper on the wind, but a whisper can still be silenced. His power was in the citadel, in the curse. He is weaker now than he has ever been, and his greatest mistake—" He looked at me, a fierce, almost terrifying love burning in his gaze. "Was touching you. He created a connection, a path, and I will walk that path to the end of the world to find him and extinguish him for good." He stood, pulling me to my feet. He was a different man. The weight of centuries had been lifted from his shoulders, and in its place was a purpose so clear and absolute it was frightening. He was no longer a king defending his territory. He was a predator hunting the thing that had dared to harm his mate. We had no way out. The great doors were sealed, the watery passage gone. But it didn't matter. Merrick walked to the main wall of the chamber, the one that faced north, toward Winterfang. He placed his hand flat against the frozen stone. He closed his eyes, and I felt it. A power, raw and immense but clean, like the mountain itself, began to gather around him. It was the full, untainted power of the Drovan bloodline, a legacy of earth and stone and winter, finally unleashed. With a low roar, he pushed. The wall did not explode. It dissolved. Stone and mortar turned to dust and cascaded away, opening a ragged hole into the gray, desolate valley outside. The dark, still water of the lake did not rush in. It seemed to part before his will, held back by an invisible barrier of pure force. He had not just broken a wall. He had commanded the very landscape to yield. He turned to me, a wild, triumphant grin on his face, the grin of a man discovering the true, breathtaking scope of his own strength. He swept me up into his arms, as if I weighed nothing. "Come, my storm," he said, his voice a joyful rumble. "Our hunt begins." He carried me out through the hole in the citadel and onto the dry lake bed. He did not pause, did not look back at the tomb of his ancestors' pain. His silver eyes were fixed on the northern horizon, on the distant, jagged peaks of home, our home, the place where our final battle would be planned. We had descended into the darkness as two broken souls, a cursed king and a storm-awakened Omega. But we emerged into the gray light of a new day as one. A single, indivisible entity, a king and his queen, a wolf and his storm. And we were going hunting. 1 year later, the world had been reborn in sunlight. The festival of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, was a tradition the winter storm pack had observed for centuries. But it had always been a solemn, almost grim affair, a defiant acknowledgement of the sun in a kingdom defined by winter, a brief respite before the inevitable return of the cold and the dark. But not this year. This year, it was a celebration of pure, unadulterated joy. The great courtyard of Winterfang Keep, usually a stark expanse of gray stone and weapon racks, was transformed. Garlands of pine boughs and vibrant mountain wildflowers were draped between the towers. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, wheels of cheese, and barrels of honeyed mead. The air, usually crisp with the scent of frost and pine, was now thick with the smells of cooking fires, spilled ale, and the sweet perfume of tundra roses. Laughter, a sound once so rare within these walls, now echoed off the stones, mingling with the lively tunes of a fiddle and drum. From the high balcony of our chambers, the same one where Merrick and I had stood in the moonlight a lifetime ago, we watched the celebration unfold. The oppressive silence of the keep was a distant memory, replaced by the vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful noise of a pack that was not just surviving, but thriving. They were celebrating more than just the sun. They were celebrating freedom. Merrick stood behind me, his arms wrapped around me, his hands resting protectively on the gentle swell of my belly. His chin was propped on my shoulder, his warm breath a familiar comfort against my cheek. He was a different man from the one I had met. The haunted, icy king was gone, replaced by a leader whose strength was now tempered with a deep, easy warmth that flowed from him like heat from a hearth, touching every member of his pack. His power was no longer a burden to be contained, but a wellspring of security that made his people feel safe in a way they never had before. His smiles were frequent now, and his laughter, a deep and resonant rumble, was the pack's favorite song. His silver eyes, clear and bright as a winter moon, watched his people. He saw Yorund, his formidable beta, laughing so hard at a joke that mead shot from his nose, and Varya, her scarred face softened by a rare, genuine smile, as she danced a clumsy jig with one of the younger warriors. He saw a pack healed, a pack whole. "Look at them," he murmured, his voice thick with a quiet pride. "They have forgotten what it is to live in fear. They follow their alpha's lead," I answered softly, laying my hands over his. "You showed them the sun, my love. They are simply learning to bask in it." The hunt for the sorcerer had been swift and brutal. Freed from the curse, Merrick's power had been a thing of absolute, terrifying focus. The faint connection the sorcerer had made by marking me had been his undoing. It was a thread, and Merrick had followed it relentlessly. With Lyra's guidance and my own storm sense to navigate the magical currents of the world, we had cornered the disembodied spirit in the ruins of an old temple in the southern wastelands. The final battle had not been one of swords or claws. It had been a battle of wills. The sorcerer, a being of pure, spiteful consciousness, had tried to poison our minds with illusions of failure and despair. But we were no longer the broken souls he had first targeted. Our trust was absolute, our bond a fortress he could not breach. While Merrick held the spirit's attention, pinning it with the sheer, immovable weight of his will, I had done what I was born to do. I had unleashed the storm. I had scoured the ruins not with fire or force, but with the purifying, absolute cold of my magic, freezing the very essence of the sorcerer's spirit until it simply ceased to be. We had not just killed a ghost, we had erased it from existence. Returning to Winterfang had been a triumph unlike any the North had ever seen. When Merrick had stood before his pack, the curse gone, his eyes blazing with a clean, new power, a roar of collective joy and relief had shaken the very foundations of the mountains. The Baron King was dead. Long live the true king. Now, a year later, the last shadow of the sorcerer's legacy was finally and truly gone. I shifted in Merrick's arms, a small, insistent flutter from within my womb, reminding me of the new life we had created, our child, the first heir to the Drovan line in centuries, to be conceived in love, not duty, and born into a world free of curses and shadows. This child, our son, would know only the strength of his father's love and the warmth of his pack's devotion. He would inherit a kingdom not of fear, but of hope. Merrick's hand moved on my belly, his palms spreading wide as if he could feel the promise of the future stirring beneath. "He is strong," he whispered, a note of pure, unadulterated wonder in his voice. This mighty king, this fearsome warrior who had stared down gods and monsters, was undone by the thought of becoming a father. "He is his father's son," I smiled. Down in the courtyard, a hush fell over the crowd. Jorand had climbed onto a table, a great drinking horn held aloft. "A toast," he bellowed, his voice carrying up to our balcony, "to the longest day, and to the Alpha who brought us out of the longest night." A roar of agreement went up from the pack. "To the Alpha, and to the Queen who is his storm," Varya shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "The moon who answered the winter's call." "To the Queen," they roared. 1,000 voices joined as one. They all turned, their faces upturned toward our balcony, their expressions a sea of love, loyalty, and gratitude. A lump formed in my throat. I looked at their faces, the warriors, the mothers, the elders, the children, and I no longer saw a foreign pack that had scorned me. I saw my family. I, the wolfless Omega, the disgrace, the shadow brought to a choosing ceremony to be an object of shame, had found my home, my purpose, my everything, in the heart of a winter storm. Merrick leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of mead, sunlight, and a love as vast and enduring as the northern sky. It was a kiss that held the memory of every trial we had faced and every victory we had won. It was the quiet promise of 1,000 more days, just like this one. "I love you, Lysandra Dravan," he murmured against my lips, his voice raw with an emotion that still, after all this time, took my breath away. "You were the beginning and the end of my curse. You are the beginning and the forever of my life." "And I love you, Merrick," I whispered back, my hand finding his, our fingers lacing together. "My king, my mate, my home." We stood together on the balcony, the king and his storm, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. But we did not fear the coming night, for we knew that even on the longest day, the moon was always there, waiting. And in our kingdom, the sun and the moon no longer ruled in opposition. They reigned together in perfect, unbreakable balance. Our story, which had begun in shame and shadows, had become a legend whispered across the land, a tale of a cursed king, a hidden power, and a bond so strong it had healed a bloodline and remade the world.